Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Doug Wilson, and today I'm chatting with Kyle Reed. Kyle is a type designer, a graphic designer, and a friend of mine who, like me, lives in Denver, Colorado. He wears a lot of hats. He runs a type foundry, a branding studio, a graphic design business, and also a company with a friend of his that researches and reports on the independent type business. I wanted to have Kyle on the show because I love his work, and I think his route to creating his own independent type foundry is both interesting and unorthodox. I also love that he's helping to build the type and design scene here in Denver. When you think about Denver, you probably think about skiing, hiking, snow-capped mountains, and maybe beer, but you probably don't think of it also as a hub for type and design. But Kyle and I see Denver as just that, an up-and-coming haven for type and graphic designers, where we can kind of figure out our own way of seeing things. Denver's often overlooked by young designers on the way to San Francisco or New York, but I think our city's filled with gems for letter people like us. So here is Kyle on the visual inspiration he finds in Denver.
Over on the east side of town is where all of the old motels were. And all of those motel signs and sign painting, they're all still there. And it just makes you feel connected. Type is a way for me to feel connected to the city of Denver because it does have its own aesthetic perspective and its own way of speaking typography.
So I'm here today with Kadley, my Creative Characters co-host and fellow Denverite. Hey, Kadley, how are you doing?
Hi, Doug. Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, Kadley, you were in the room for my interview with Kyle, helping out with the recording and such. And we'll get into that. But first, most importantly, I want to talk about what we did that day, which was get some amazing pastries.
Yes. To be honest, I feel like when we started planning this episode, you, Kyle, and I were just like selfishly trying to come up with a reason to eat pastries together in Denver. So,
unfortunately, this is a podcast, so I don't know that we can share the true joy of it. But yeah, before we met up and got coffee and pastries at what I think is the best pastry shop in Denver, Colorado, at Get Right in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, pretty close to my house. I had an amazing pistachio praline cream puff, which was just totally out of this world. And they're also known for these really nice Italian stuffed donuts that are called Maritosis that are so fantastically good and not too sweet. I don't remember. What did you have that day?
I definitely enjoyed the almond croissant. It was like really light and flaky, just a little bit sweet and surprisingly light for a croissant.
Maybe we should start a separate podcast about pastries in Denver. That might be good.
I'm down. Yeah.
May not be good for our waistlines, but
I was going to say we'll just have to do some cycling too on this.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just have to. Exactly. That's a good idea. We'll just cycle to the different pastry shops. So, okay. Coffee and pastries have been consumed, and we set up a little studio in my home office and started to chat with Kyle.
So, Doug, I'm curious, how did you and Kyle originally meet?
So I met Kyle back in 2015 when TypeCon was hosted in Denver. At the time, my wife and I were looking to move and had narrowed it down to either Denver or Boston. And so it was the perfect time to check out the city and go to the conference. I knew Kyle through the internet, and so we met up. He borrowed a couple of bicycles and we cycled around the city, and he showed me some of his favorite spots. And I guess that worked because obviously I moved to Denver later that year in 2015.
Amazing. So what are some of the main things you and Kyle covered in the episode?
I was really interested in learning how Kyle balances his branding work and his type design work. He is not just one or the other, he is both, and he brings an interesting perspective to that. One thing he said that was really encouraging to me is that he's more optimistic about typography and type design than ever before. And I think that's something that a lot of us need to hear right now. There's so much anxiety in the design and the type world about AI and the future and what will change. And so I really thought his perspective was interesting to hear.
Well, thanks for the quick preview, Doug. I'm going to turn it over to you and Kyle for today's episode.
Today on the podcast, I'm so excited to introduce my good friend Kyle Reed, who's a type designer, type enthusiast, type chronicler, and also someone that lives in Denver, Colorado. So today we're recording here in my home office in Denver, Colorado. So it's kind of a Denver episode today.
Hi, Doug. It's really nice to be here. I'm glad we can meet in person.
Absolutely. So we've been friends for 10 years or so, but I'm so excited to talk a little bit about Denver, a little bit about your type career, you're 10, 15 years in, and a little bit about the chronicling, as I said, that you do of typography with Badson. So first of all, I would just love to hear, how do you introduce yourself?
I'm Kyle. That's usually what I say. Titles are tough because I feel like I wear a lot of hats, but I usually say I'm a type designer, I'm a graphic designer, and just general letter person.
Got it. And what do you mean by letter person?
There's so many ways to come at typography that I've decided that letter person of letters, is all-encompassing enough to the point where it can spark further conversation or just be left at that.
Got it. So I know you went and did some official education, both in graphic design and in type design. Tell me a little bit about your path to becoming a person of letters.
Oh man, that's a long story, I think. Well, I grew up in the Northeast and I wanted to get out of the Northeast for college. So I went to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. I fell into both graphic design and printmaking programs there. I think the central Venn diagram, shared space of those two worlds is typography for sure. I was an etcher in college, so I did a lot of etchings, dealing with metal, and I found a real love for the tangible side of typography while I was learning the digital side in the graphic design career. So after that, I went to work for a couple of different big companies, small companies, design studios, advertising agencies, all over the place. Ended up in New York, and I did the Type at Cooper program in one of the first couple of years that they had that going there in New York. And that really opened my eyes to, okay, this is what I want to be doing. This is what I love. And I just took it from there and realized that it was skills in my back pocket that could help my graphic design career, but also skills that could stand on their own and help me towards making my own studio or my own type foundry down the line.
So you do have your own type foundry, Badson.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
Well, that's just the outfit that I invented for myself. When I moved out to Denver in 2014 from New York, I would have set up a type foundry in New York, but that was prohibitively expensive. So Denver was it. And I picked the city and just started doing some brand design in the studio as Badson Studio, but also paired that with a way to explore my love of typography. And that was through the Badson Type Foundry. So these two pillars of the business have always been there since the beginning. And they inform each other, they help each other. And I can explore what typography means in the realm of branding and in graphic design, but also what the role of branding is in the world of typography.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about you. You did do official education in typography. You do have a type studio, but I've always admired that you kind of inform both things, both the design and branding side and the typography side. So I think that's really interesting. It sounds like that was a cognizant and obvious choice for you?
Yeah, in some ways I think I was forced into it by keeping those two things in balance with each other. Type design is notoriously not great at making money very quickly.
Yeah.
So I started the studio as a way to bolster the income of the studio and the business while providing some cover time for me to design typefaces and get some products out and things like that. So the studio has always served the type foundry, and that's the way I prefer it. But throughout the last 10 years, the balance of that equation has changed a lot. It's been different.
I want to dig in a little bit more about this being a type designer, but also having this kind of branding studio side as well, one trying to support the other. Because I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of young designers or people that are thinking about type design understand the economics of it. And money doesn't come in quickly, especially when you're an independent foundry, right? And if you don't have a banger right out of the gate, that money is really tough. And that's a real pressure. And it seems like you dealt with that in an interesting way. So tell me more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was coming out of school, design school and type school, I realized I had very specialist skills with type design, but they weren't really that marketable right off the bat. I had to find ways to get to those clients, those projects, especially going out on my own. So the branding studio really came in handy there. And that's how I was able to get some retainer clients, get some adventures going in the world of branding and graphic design to support the type design side. So it felt as though I had to put type design on the back burner or make it a side project. It felt like that a lot. And it's a bummer that I had to do that, honestly. I didn't prioritize it as much as I, looking back on it, wanted to. But it was helpful because I got to learn a lot just over the course of the next several years. Was why do I want to be making typography? I think I started making typography designing type because I thought it was cool and I liked it and it was pretty and I was considered myself an artist. But the branding studio side of things opened up my world a little bit more and showed me that typography serves a very specific role as a piece of design, as a design tool. And that helped me understand why I was making typography. Is it for brands? Is it for people? Is it for my own artistic satisfaction? Like, having a chance to drill into that answer was really helpful.
You said that you were maybe disappointed on that balance at some points.
Yeah.
Was that frustrating? Were you like, no, I went to school for type and I'm not selling type?
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. I lamented the fact that capitalism entered the equation. It's just one of those realities of life that I don't think I was prepared to deal with when I started my own foundry.
Right.
I had an idea of what, starting a studio or a foundry would be like, and I had a business model and I had a plan, but best laid plans of mice and men, right? It never really works out that way. And I lamented it a little bit that I had to put type design, which is such a long-term project,
right,
on a different track than the short-term needs of supporting myself and growing my career in a way and just paying the rent.
Are you still disappointed with yourself now, or do you understand like, hey, that's how I had to make the bills, I had to make the rent, and where are you today?
I can't say I'm disappointed with it now. I think it was all a learning experience, and I'm happy about the fact that I got a chance to work with some incredible clients on the design side and find another route to typography for myself. And that's where I'm at today. I've had the chance to do some incredible custom type work, and that's linked up to a lot of the design projects that I've been able to get with some pretty fantastic clients over the years. And type design itself has always been an additional selling point, I think. It's never been the thing that people come to me for, but I can add it on to my studio offering and say, hey, look, this is a big part of branding. And I have that capability. And I've been able to increase the size of projects or the scope of projects based on that being on my skills list, I guess. So I don't regret it at all. It's definitely been a learning experience, but I'm hoping now to turn the tide a little bit and move more of my time and the balance of that equation to the type design side a little bit more. Yeah, I'm not a young, sprightly guy anymore to the point where I need to be hustling. Hustle culture is not for me.
Yeah.
And I don't need to pay the rent as urgently now as I needed to before. So I've got a little space, a little time, and a little ease of mind now to invest my time in the things that I want to be doing. And that really is the type side. So I've finally been allowed to indulge in that side of the business.
Your kind of career trajectory.
Yeah.
I admire and I like to like promote because it's not just a direct line. You didn't just go to type school and cool, you made a couple great typefaces and then a brand used it and then it blew up and boom, you bought a house with your fonts, right?
Right.
Like,
that's the dream. Yeah.
That's the dream, I suppose. But like it, rarely happens. So to me, I think especially for other young designers that are listening, I like to promote this as like, hey, this path isn't a single path. It's different for every person. And like, that's easy. We always hear that, but like, I like talking to people that have had a slightly less than straight and direct career path because that's the reality for most of us, right?
Yeah. I've always been one of those people who had a plan and I stuck to it, and I have a vision for life or where I want to be in 5 years, and I've got a roadmap. So it was really frustrating to all of a sudden discover that the roadmap needed to just get chucked out the window.
Right.
And it's okay that happened. Yeah, I'm actually better off for it now. I think a lot of the perspectives that I have in the branding world have informed my type design practice. I've kept up with skills the whole time, so it's not like I'm rusty and revisiting it now, but it's, I know what brands want, what brands need, what's current, what the tastes are, what's economically viable. If I'm going to start a type foundry from scratch, I know how I would do it. I think there's a lot of good information that I've gleaned from not taking the original roadmap and having to detour through struggles with finding clients or doing work or prioritizing my own type design over client work, that kind of thing.
So Badson Type, you just said that you now kind of know how you would start a new foundry with all this kind of 10 years experience of branding and working with clients. So tell me, what is your vision moving forward with Badson Type?
Great question. I'm glad you asked. No, I mean, there's so many ways to go. I'm actually more optimistic now about typography and type design than ever before. There's so many possibilities. For Badson Type, I want to be making brand-ready typefaces that are personality-driven, that have a sensibility about them that's well-crafted. You can be so perfect, but I think that's become a detriment to a lot of type design, and it ends up homogenizing a lot of type design. So somebody can be making a Geo Sans, and it will appear very close to somebody else's Geo Sans because it doesn't have those personal imperfections or style notes that would be happening if it was crafted in a different way. So I'd like to be making typefaces now that still retain a little bit of that personality of the designer while projecting a personality that's appealing for brand use and for use by independent designers, freelancers. I'm not at the enterprise level yet, but that's where Badson Type is headed, and I'm really stoked about what originality can come out of that primordial soup.
Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting. Tell me a little bit more what you mean when you say you want to make type that is brand ready, because I think that's a specific thing I've heard you say before, but what does that mean?
Sure. I think as a type designer, we have an obligation to the people who buy typefaces to let them know about what the end game is for that type. How is it able to be used, or what's the possibility down the road? If you just say, hey, here's my typeface, it's a Humanist Sans and it looks great, that's not going to help the person at the other end identify how they want to use it or how they need to use it. Designing typefaces that have a very specific goal in the branding world or whatever need you're designing it for, that's always more helpful to me as a designer in buying type than it is otherwise. So brand ready to me means somebody can see what success looks like in using that font just by looking at it. And they don't need to be educated additionally otherwise. They can see themselves in it. They can see their own path towards use of it immediately. And it might mean that some of the fonts are a little bit more personality driven or quirky or odd than your typical economic winner of a Geo Sans or whatever.
Right.
But that's okay. I think the generalization of typography now it's a tough field to compete in as a small independent foundry. So finding a way to make it yours is paramount.
I just like seeing you explaining that because it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I mean, I see a lot of type being released. There are a lot of foundries out there. I have a lot of good friends in the industry. And I feel that I can always tell when a typeface was designed for the people that are actually using type.
Yes.
Graphic designers, web designers, people in the office. And when a type is designed just to impress other type designers. And I just find that first group that is for the people that are actually using type to be so much more important. And that utilitarianism of type sometimes gets lost when you're trying to show off all of your stuff. And I like hearing designers. And again, it goes back to your career experience so far of like, oh, I was a brand designer. I worked at an agency. I know what they're looking for. So let me see if I can package my fonts or design them in a way that makes it more obvious to the end user how to use it because they're busy and because they have a specific goal in mind. And you kind of know that.
Yes, exactly right. It's one of those things that I've gleaned from taking the detours in my design career that would seem detrimental or like a waste of time to other people. But I've learned what brands and designers want to be using and the quality of tools and the craft that is essential or needs to go into those typefaces to make them desirable. These are the things that I've learned, and I'm excited to be able to apply that now to Badson Type. I don't need to be making another Geo Sans because, gosh, there's some incredible people out there that have done incredible Geo Sans. I don't need to be the one contributing to that conversation. The conversation that I think I do need to be contributing to and would like to contribute more to is in the marketing of fonts. In this new era for Badson Type coming up, I'm treating it as an experimental ground for how can a small foundry start to get their wares out there in unique, authentic, and different ways than the typical trodden paths that exist now. I have no idea what that route looks like. As a person who likes to have a game plan, that's nerve-wracking.
For sure.
But I've got a lot of great ideas, and from what I've seen in the type world before, there's a playbook for marketing fonts. I think that playbook needs updating, and I'm using Badson Type as a way to start experimenting with that a little bit, writing a new playbook and getting things off of just straight digital media, social media. The landscape is very different than it was even a year ago. And so I think there's a lot of ways to go there, but Badson Type is a way for me to tinker and play with that.
I think that's great. Also, thank you so much for the perfect segue, because you're talking about marketing. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about another big project that you and a good friend of yours have been working on. And it's so much related to independent typography, independent foundries, and marketing, which is, of course, Proof & Co. So tell the listeners what Proof & Co. is and what your goal was.
Proof & Co. is a data and analytics firm for typography. We are looking at the landscape in type. So that's everything from how much does a font cost all the way up to, what are the big ideas floating around there in type world. So we're looking to chronicle that and just understand the world of independent type a little bit deeper. It's our vehicle for answering questions about typography. And it's enabled me to continue to be a cheerleader for type designers. As a type designer myself, I really enjoy working on type. But I also really enjoy promoting other people's typefaces because I can use them without really using them, the typefaces, that is. And it's just a way to be a fan of typography and help out the economics of the industry itself. It's something that we haven't seen too many other companies really go for. There are a lot of ways to stay connected with the type industry, what's being released and stuff, but there aren't a lot of advocates out there for independent type designers who are just trying to go it on their own like I have been.
What I think is so interesting about Proof & Co. is really that data side of things. I know I heard you once explain it to me as inside baseball, but for the type world.
That's right. Yeah, you know that Moneyball, that the book that came out, they turned into a movie with Brad Pitt?
Of course.
I wanted you to see these player evaluations that you asked me to do.
I asked you to do 3.
Yeah.
To evaluate 3 players.
Yeah.
How many did you do?
47.
We talk about that a lot as if it was Moneyball for type, as a way of understanding typefaces as characters on a stage, but also as points on a graph. And you have to really keep those two in mind. But uncovering the hidden value in specific typefaces or specific movements in type or ideas that are bubbling up. I think friends of the industry first, capitalists second. That's what we usually say at Proof & Co. And we're really just here to help understand the type world in that way a little bit better. There isn't a lot of economic information that flows out of the type industry very much or very quickly.
Right.
You'll learn about it 10 years later being like, oh yeah, they made that much that year. But what is happening now and how can that help small independent foundries get going in a better direction faster?
I think that approach of data is really interesting. I know. Yeah. So it's Joshua Dick is your partner at Proof & Co. And I love this. Just we're going to have spreadsheets about the independent font.
Get excited
industry.
About spreadsheets, guys.
Yeah, but you guys are. No, it's great because you're crunching data. You're looking at things. You're giving information that isn't anywhere else. You're kind of aggregating all of this, average price of a font, or this. All of a sudden last year monospaces were a really big thing. That's right. That's the trend. And then that information seems so incredibly valuable to independent type designers.
For sure. We have a lot of different audiences actually with Proof & Co. We talk about type users, people who just buy and use typography, type designers, type makers, those who are in the trenches designing type every day, type marketers and business people who are looking at the lay of the land and being like, how do I price these fonts? How do I price licensing tiers? How do I understand the economics of investing my time in building a font for a full year and knowing that this is going to come out in 2026 or whatever? How do you deal with that? Yeah, we like the data side to answer some of those questions that weren't publicly available before. And you really just trial and error was the only method of getting those together.
Yeah, type. It's a funny industry, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you kind of create this thing, you baby it for a year or two, and then you release it, and maybe it's
kind of hope.
Yeah, you just kind of hope it
Yeah.
doesn't. Maybe it becomes a banger. Maybe literally no one even sees it.
Right.
And it's such a strange thing. So that's what I think is interesting with Proof & Co., that you're kind of trying to give some information about that, to give a more informed choice, it sounds like, for independent type designers.
Yeah, we do that in several ways. Every year we release an annual report, which is available, very soon, if not now, when this podcast comes out. And we do it every year. So we're tracking the health of the industry throughout several years. And we're only at the beginning of our dive into that. But it's a way for people to understand the lay of the land, the way that typography is going, and what opportunities there are to jump in and do well. We have a podcast of our own, which is exciting, where we talk about recent releases and why this is exciting, why something might be doing well, or some of the topics that are going on in type. We also have a free newsletter that I encourage everyone to sign up for, just to know what typefaces are coming out every week and how you can go ahead and support all the independent foundries that are releasing things and keeping the conversation alive around all those things.
I think that's great. I mean, yeah, personally, I listen to the podcast. I also,
Thanks.
Not just because you're my friend, I promise,
Yeah,
but
I
like it's
appreciate that.
really useful. And what I like is that like it's a podcast, just like this podcast is, about a visual medium.
Yes,
but like you
right?
still like that's its own challenge. But I think
Yeah.
you and Joshua do a really great job of making it interesting and entertaining, talking about bigger things, talking both at the macro and the micro level about type in the industry. And I think it's helpful for designers or type designers.
Our
So I
podcast
find
is so silly. It's ridiculous. We have games and things that we play, but the goal of all of these conversations is really towards, what do you find fun about typography? What are the happy points for you? It's when you get bogged down in the data of it all, it can seem very boring or very neutral or kind of depressing sometimes.
Right.
But typography ultimately is supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be enjoyable and a community event. And I hope that the work that we're doing at Proof & Co., and as well as some of the work that I'm doing with Badson Type, can start to bolster that community feeling and just energy and I don't know, excitement around being able to release fonts and celebrate that a little bit more.
I love that you talk about community, because type is an interesting thing, right? It's a small field. So talk to me a little bit more about that community aspect. What do you think is important there?
I think the first and foremost point that needs to be pressed about the community in type is that it is a community of producers. They're artists, they are craftspeople, they are people who strive for output. And that can come in a lot of different forms. But when you have a community of people that relies on output or is based on output, it can either get really competitive and everybody gets gnarly or secretive or skeptical or they're filled with self-doubt. Or it can go another way, and that's it can become a spiral upwards, and everybody supports each other and floats all boats, right?
Right.
And I think that's what type is headed towards, which is great. The conferences that happen, big type, like companies like Monotype that sponsor events, it's a big deal. And creating those spaces continually for people to come together and celebrate what they're doing, ask questions, have mentorship. This is not a big industry. And the more that we can support and uplift each other and each other's work, but also each other's lifestyles and interests and perspectives, the better. That's what it's all about.
I think you're totally right. It can be either like super competitive and everyone's trying to stab everybody's back.
Yeah.
Or it can be a different way. And I personally also want to see the type industry be that first. I want it to be that latter example of a community, a rising tide that raises all boats, that encourages new people to come in. That's the thing I'm so excited, right? I've been in the type world now 15, 20 years, and all these new designers coming in with totally different viewpoints than mine, right?
Yes.
I think that's so exciting. And I want to see those people celebrated. And I love seeing these platforms that people can experiment on. I think all of that is so good. So I love hearing other people saying like, no, let's make this community the community we want to be a part of.
Yeah.
So Kyle, you mentioned a little bit about community. Tell me a bit more about the community of Denver. So you and I are we're in the same room right now, which is super fun.
Yeah.
We both live in Denver. Denver is a city I'm very proud to be a member of. So tell me a bit more about Denver as a whole and the design and type community.
You bet. So I grew up in New Jersey, went to college in the South, and kind of made my way west throughout my career. But I chose Denver back 10 years ago because it seemed like a new or up and coming city. It was a city that could still be molded. I still find that to be true for the most part. I think Denver is often forgot about. Yeah. It's a flyover city. Yep. It's between the coasts.
Right.
Like we are an island out here.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, Denver is its own insular community of creatives. It's got its own style, its own vibe and way of expressing itself. There's some really great people here.
Denver is very interesting because there are a fair amount of people now in this town.
Yeah.
In the type industry. Talk a bit about that.
There are lots of young designers. There are lots of experienced designers, people like Steve Madison, who lives near Boulder, and Rick Griffith, who has been pushing letterpress and slinging ink and doing some really incredible community work himself with Matter here in Denver.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's just like a really great sense of possibility and optimism and the space to be able to explore that. I mean, I know, Doug, that you have a lot of sources of inspiration and you're always taking pictures of type. You know just as well as me, Denver is a really great place for the type nerd who just walks on the street and wants to take pictures of type.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I live more on the east side of town, and there's 70 that goes all the way across the country, comes right through Denver, and the old 70 is a road here called Colfax.
Yep.
And over on the east side of town is where all of the old motels were. Absolutely. When people would come into Denver from Kansas.
Yes, exactly.
And all of those motel signs and sign painting, they're all still there.
Yeah.
They're going away, but they're all still there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just makes you feel connected. Type is a way for me to feel connected to the city of Denver because it does have its own aesthetic perspective and its own way of speaking typography. And I'm into that. It's unique. It's not San Francisco, it's not Chicago, it's not New York, and it's not Austin. I mean, it's got its own vibe and own source of inspiration and community input.
We are not sponsored by the Denver Chamber of Commerce, but I think we should be.
That's true. No, I mean, I actually really believe in Denver, and if you're a young person who's looking to get into type, consider some of these other cities that don't have a story written already. Be a part of writing some other story in another city. I mean, that's what I think you and I are doing here, and so many other people are pioneering and getting through. So I don't know, Denver's good for that.
The last thing about Denver is something that I know that you and I a little bit are trying to build is a bit of a Denver type meetup. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes. Community is really important. And I think here in Denver, it's really the Front Range that we consider here in Denver.
Right.
Boulder all the way up to Fort Collins in the north, and then all the way down to Pueblo and beyond in the south. That whole Front Range has its own sense of pride and desire to talk to each other. So I'm a member of the Book Arts League in Boulder, and we talk type every once in a while, and those meetups are really, really good. There's a great scene of printmakers and artists who know a lot about typography and can explore those arts. So gallery openings and fun little neighborhoods where people can experience letter arts. I mean, there's calligraphers here. There are book and box makers here. There's people that contribute to the letter arts that aren't necessarily just type designers, but they all feed off of each other. And you're also really not very far removed from the history of type in Colorado. History is really tangible here. The mountain printers that were all running their own letterpress shops in order to get news across the mountains and the Rockies. All of their wood type and all of their machines and everything, they've accumulated on the Front Range, and you can go experience that and touch that and be a part of that and still talk to people who were contributors to that scene and that growth of typography in Colorado.
It's a special spot. Yeah, we're promoting it.
We're promoting it because we'd like to see that continue to grow.
Exactly.
It's not like
absolutely.
We're the only people here, and there are a lot of people.
There's so many. Yeah, it's people from all sorts of different parts of the type industry are here.
Yeah,
and yeah, I think it's important to kind of to build and grow that. So Kyle, with your past experience of not just being a type designer for the past 10 or 15 years, but also being a designer and a brand designer and working with ad agencies, I think that you have kind of some interesting and new ideas for how you want to market yourself as Badson and typography. Tell me a bit about that.
Sure. There's a lot that's left on the table when it comes to type design. I think type foundries are founded by type designers and people who love making type, but often the conversation ends there and the sales, the marketing aspect of things is just not given the attention that it needs, or there hasn't been that much exploration in that. One of the things I'm working on with Badson Type Foundry is what are the new ways of marketing fonts, getting your name out or your products out there? How are you putting font collections together? I'm working on creating typefaces that are in brand palettes, not just one-off typefaces. I'm working on, building community outside of just posting stuff on Instagram. I do have a marketing background in some of the graphic design clients that I've had before. I've been lucky enough to be able to help grow businesses. I've started some businesses and seen what it takes to grow a network of people and go from there. I think type foundries don't get that resource as potently as they deserve. So yeah, I'm going to be doing some experimenting with Badson Type to see what kind of marketing techniques can help other type foundries begin to market in new ways.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I love hearing your point of view on the industry, and as a designer yourself, I think you have such an interesting perspective. So thanks for joining, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself today.
I really did. This has been fantastic, and to do it with a friend in Denver makes it all the better. So thanks.
If you'd like to check out Kyle's branding and type design work, make sure to visit Badson Type. That's BADSONTYPE.com. And if you want to see Kyle's research on the independent type world, check out their 2023 annual report at proofco.xyz. That's PROOFCO.xyz. And make sure to sign up for the newsletter.
Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please rate us, subscribe to the show, and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It is produced by Christopher Olin and Mia Sullivan. We'll be back with more episodes soon.